Hey everybody, this is Aaron, Aaron's Audio Corner. Feel sorry about being late. I know some of y'all might have been waiting around to see me backstage, but I was at the show and man, we had a rocking good time. So I want to say hey to everybody and apologize once again for running a little bit late. It's the life of dad. I was watching some Harry Potter and just hanging out and doing my thing and lost track of time. And what can I say? I had some equipment failures. So anyway, good news is we're here now. And we're going to review the Vandersteen 2Cs. Now, some of you may be thinking, Aaron, why are you reviewing the 2Cs? And I'm going to tell you, I was curious. Some of you are thinking, Aaron, some of those speakers that you're testing, 2Cs, 30, 40 years old, man, what do you need to test them for? Well, I'm curious. I think y'all might be too. Some might be saying, Aaron, are you sure the speakers are actually as good as they once were? I say, man, I think so, but truthfully, I don't know, man. Could the capacitors be messed up by now? Yeah, possibly. What about them resistors? Yeah, possibly. Is there ferrofluid in that tweeter? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe not. But I will say that I looked around to see what other people's results were from the 80s and the 90s, your stereophile types and whatnots. And the results from this review, they're pretty in line with what I see. So I feel confident that for this educational purpose that we're about to go on today, feel good that it's okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump in and we're gonna talk about what I heard with this speaker. First of all, when I listened to the speaker, I didn't have the stands. And the stands is supposed to put the speakers up high and tilt them back. Well, come back to that a little bit later, but I will say right up front that the whole tilting back thing with the speakers and the drivers already time aligned physically, it just seems a bit redundant to me, but hey, what do I know? Also note that I did see where some people were saying, well, you didn't test them the right way because you didn't have all the stuff. Well, fellas, let me just tell you, when I get me some speakers, I don't just plop them down in the living room and turn them sideways and sit on them. I take time, I position them, try to get them about right. I even use RTA sometimes. I know. Don't use the RTA. Measurements don't matter. Well, I'll tell you, sometimes I might agree, but I use that RTA, make sure things is lining up pretty good. Now, pulled these speakers about 3 feet out from the front wall. Sounded about best. Pushed them back. No bueno, my friend. 3 feet. About the right spot. Now, about 8 feet from each side wall. Pretty good. Stereo width from these speakers, meh, is okay. Not great. I do know some people who said that they thought stereo width was great, but I think, based off the data, they're more likely hearing some bleed through on the mid-range that's going toward the back of the speaker, maybe reflecting off that front wall and coming back to you. That's my guess. We'll talk about that too in a little bit. Oh, what else was there? Alignment. Well, get on the tweeter level. If you sit above the tweeter levels, bad news. Think anybody would know that. Now, I did see where somebody shared this review or the written review and the data over on the Vandersteen forum. And here's what I thought was really neat. And I think that all you audiophile types ought to really pay attention to this. A few people had some negative things to say. Well, you didn't do this or you didn't do that. I mean, you done thought I was born yesterday, but tell you what, old Richard Vandersteen himself, he came on there and he said, yeah, measurements are measurements, okay. And the fella feels the way he feels about them. And okay. And that was pretty much it. Can you imagine? Can you imagine being an owner of a speaker company and being not at all perturbed about somebody's feelings about your speaker? Meanwhile, the other fellers out there who own that speaker are all up in a hissy fit about how somebody else felt about a speaker. Don't that seem a little bit asinine to y'all? Don't that seem a little bit weird? Fellas, it's just audio at the end of the day. We're having fun with this. What do you think we're doing right now? We're having fun with this. We're going to talk science. We're going to talk speakers. And we're going to have fun with it. And we're going to learn. So this review is for educational purposes. As an old speaker, maybe not the best sample. I will say if Mr. Vandersteen happens to watch this, if you'd like to send me something to review and loan, I'm not going to keep it. I'm not asking to keep it. Loan it. I'll send it back to you when I'm done. That'd be kind of cool. Then we could compare old versus new. Just putting that out there for y'all. All right, let me look at my notes here. I'm got my website up. I'm gonna show it on the stream here. This is where I've got all my blah blah blah, and This is good for me to help me remember what I'm doing. Yeah, this speaker's old, about 30 years old at this point. It's a Model 2C. I think they were in production from about 1980 to 1989, give or take. And some of you experts out there can verify or check me on that. I'll be honest with you. I looked on their website, and that's kind of the range I remember, but it's close enough. So I say, upon initial listen, I was a bit confused. It did sound a bit odd. What do I mean when I say confused? Well, I was sitting up above the tweeter line, and naturally I brought myself down a little bit, but it's an odd speaker. I didn't quite get it. The Soundstage wasn't quite as wide as I thought it would be, just based off of some other people's comments to me about it. And overall, it just wasn't my type of speaker. I get it. People love this speaker. I get it. I think it's cool looking. I think it's crude. Just a big square rectangle box with grill cloth on it. And man, I dig it. I'll tell you what, I just think that's cool. I know that it ain't fancy, but that's what I dig about it. All right. Cannot give any credence to the mechanical offset of the drivers. And what do I mean when I say the mechanical offset of the drivers? Well, let's take a look at the picture up here. And this is a picture. Here, we're going to do a blow away. No. All right. So this is what the drivers look like in the cabinet. You got a tweeter, mid-range, mid-woofer, and then they call this, what is it? I don't remember if they call it a coupled woofer, but basically to me, it's a passive radiator. I know they probably have a fancier name for it, but I think by today's standard, it's probably what we would consider a passive radiator at the bottom. Now, keep going. You can see that there's kind of a step stair alignment to this speaker. Tweeter, mid-range, mid-woofer, and then from the side, tweeter step back a little bit, mid-range to step back off the cabinet a little bit, and then you got the mid-woofer down here. Now, they're supposed to be physically time aligned. These speakers do come with an angled little shelf thing to sit it on to align the speakers even more. I thought that was a bit redundant, like I said before, but okay. So let's go back down here, pick up where I was just leaving off with my notes here. Goodness. I tell you, if it weren't for these notes, I would be lost. Okay, so I say I cannot give credence to the physical offset because I don't know what I was hearing in regards to that. You would have to separate time offset from frequency response, and you can't do it. You'd have to A/B that. Now, I can tell you that via DSP, I've set many systems up with proper time alignment, and it makes a noticeable difference. But the thing is that you would have to fix the crossover to also work with that time alignment. So if you start off with poor time alignment and you build a crossover, and then you add time alignment, well, now your crossover is going to crap, and vice versa. So let's just make that little caveat clear right up front. Let's see. I said vocals sound a bit subdued in the mid-range, and I found myself playing around with the knobs on the back to get the right balance. Yeah. And when I looked at the data, I saw why 2 to 3 dip from 400 hertz to 1 kilohertz. Boosting the mid-range via the knob kind of helps, but it also makes the response a little bit more worse. Now, what do I mean? Well, when you had that little step stair, let's roll back up here again, and I'm bouncing all over the place because, I have the speaker over here, but I can't take the grill cloth off, so we have to look at pictures. You see this little step right here? Well, you got sound radiating from the tweeter forward, but you've also got sound radiating from the tweeter downward. And you're going to say, well, it's got felt cloth. Well, that felt cloth can only help certain frequencies. Usually it's about a quarter wavelength, if you're lucky, and above the thickness of that felt cloth. So I can't do that math in my head, but I'm going to guess you're probably talking 6 kilohertz and above, give or take an octave. I don't know. See where I'm going with this. And then you got the same thing going on with the mid-range. You got a step stair. Well, I think what's going on is that the speaker coming out, or the sound coming out here, and then it's hitting this step stair, and it's coming back, and it's causing a typical classical comb patterning filter. Or comb filter pattern. There we go. I'll get my words right. Right here. I'm going to blow this up for y'all. And scroll back up. Back to barrel. Okay, so comb filter pattern, we got it. High frequencies right through here. 1 kilohertz and above. Peak dip, peak dip, peak dip, Peak dip, peak dip. What does that mean? That means if you're listening to a song that has two instruments that are really close together in frequency, let's say one's at 1.2 kilohertz and the other one's at 1.5 kilohertz, 300 hertz off. That's like, I don't know, what is that, like a third of an octave? Yeah, it's about a third of an octave, right? One is about plus 3 dB and the other one's about minus 3 dB or plus or minus 2 dB within 300 hertz. This is the most musical dependent speaker I have ever heard. And I've heard audiophiles say those kind of things before, and they never really made sense to me. But this is a prime example of a speaker that is very dependent upon music. If you have a particular track with a certain song or a certain note at this frequency, and then another one at this frequency, they might sound completely different, and then play another track and it'd be the opposite thing. So, like I said, very, very music dependent speaker we got right here. Now, on the bass end of things, it got reasonably low. It's not the super lowest in response, but it was reasonably low. But let's start looking at the data now. I do want to say that I'm using Klippel's near field scanner. It's a state-of-the-art robot. Now, back in my day, when I was just a little youngling, I didn't even know robots were the dadgum devil, like foosball. You didn't mess with robots because robots are going to come after you like them aliens. So, but now the robots is working for us, at least for now. And we use them, to measure speakers is what we can do. So it's pretty cool stuff. Near field scanner, Klippel. Man, that thing is awesome. Let's see if I can increase this size for y'all a little bit more. Now we're going to look at the response. Black is on axis. We just saw the same thing. So going through the mid-range, you've got a bit of a bump in the mid-range output. Lower mid-range, so it's going to be your low to mid fundamental vocals for male, and maybe about mid to maybe mid-upper fundamental, not harmonics, fundamental for a female vocal. And that could sound a little bit chesty, a little bit like that, about 250 hertz, lighten up a little bit. Strong dip, cancellation around 500 hertz. Well, why is that? Not sure. Could be breakup mode, could be an internal resonance in the enclosure, could just be part of the frame structure of the speaker itself. I don't know. And I'm not going to pretend like I do know. Now let's go higher up in frequency, and that's where things really take a turn for what I would consider the worst. And depending on the music that you listen to, you might consider it the best. Plus minus about 2 dB, 3 dB, depending on where you're looking at, all from 1 kilohertz to about maybe 8 kilohertz or so, give or take. And like I said, what does that mean to you? It probably means that your speakers are going to be more music dependent than you are used to. Do you like that sound? Maybe you do. This review is not going to cause any issues in the market for Vandersteen speakers. Not at all. If you already like the speaker, you're going to buy it no matter what I say in this review. This, again, is pretty much just educational, just so we can see what a 30-year-old, 40-year-old speaker used to be able to do and give us a baseline for when people say, oh, I remember that speaker. It sounded incredible. Well, maybe what did you like about it? What might you not like about it? Hey, by today's standards, why would you maybe want something a little bit better? Now let's go down here. We'll look at the directivity index, early reflection, directivity index. Pretty much omnidirectional until about 1 kilohertz, where you start increasing the directionality and you've got some kind of resonance going on here that is pretty much starts to radiate a little bit more omnidirectionally than it does relative to the listening window. And then you start to focus up in your directivity, but then you flatten back out. And I would say that you stay flat through about 3 kilohertz to maybe 10 kilohertz. So there's good EQ ability there, which means that you could probably go through here and take out some of these peaks and dips. But if you own this speaker, you're probably not wanting to add EQ to it. I'm willing to bet most people who are after this speaker, man, y'all are like, I like my analogs, I ain't like my digitals. And you can use analog EQs, but most everybody today is using digital EQs, so could use EQ. You're probably not going to use EQ. Now, you can flip the little knobs on the back. I played around with that, didn't find much luck. Sounded better with them just set to 0. If I set the knob on the tweeter level to +2, made this stuff a little bit more worse. So it's a mixed bag. That's what I'm here to tell you. It's an interesting speaker. It's a 30-year-old, 40-year-old design. interesting speaker, fun to look at the data and try to gather some thoughts on it. Estimated in-room response. So this drives a lot of what you're expecting to hear in a speaker and pretty much nails it every single time. So what do I gather from that? Well, let's talk about relative things, okay? So if we talk about this mid-range trough right through here, relative to the lower mid-range area, it's going to sound recessed. Conversely, this lower mid-range area could sound a little bit more boosted or heavy or thick versus the mid-range region. So that's why data is useful, because when you say something, it may mean the opposite to me, or it may just have the opposite implication to other people. Not necessarily mean the opposite, but just people think it means something different. So, well, we keep going. We see a little bit of a bump through here in this 1 kilohertz region, and we keep going. What we see here is in the room, the tweeter level is about 2, 3, 5 dB, depending on where you're looking at, lower than the mid-range. And that's exactly what I heard. Now, again, I messed with the tweeter knob on the back and I turned it up, but then it just changed the tonality too much and I didn't like it. So I say, play with it. You know, if you own these and you're looking at this data and you're thinking, what does this help me with? Well, this tells you, does it sound a little bit dull in your room? Maybe turn the tweeter up a little bit. Is the mid-range a little bit too much? Maybe turn that mid-range down a little bit. This is all common sense stuff, but the data kind of gives you an idea of what you're going for. No. Let's talk about soundstage radiation, and we're going to use this glow plot. My wonderful glow plot. I love this thing, if I say so myself. Now, I'm 70 years old. I've lived the rock star life, you know, been around. I've seen the globe, you know, but I like the globe plots. With that said, the red area, plus or minus 30 degrees in radiation pattern for the most part. Not a very wide sounding speaker. Why do I say that? Well, some speakers are plus or minus 90 degrees. Plus or minus 70 degrees is not uncommon at all for a tweeter on a flat baffle. Wave-guided speakers or wave-guided tweeters are usually plus or minus 50 degrees. So this is a more narrow design than even a wave-guided tweeter. Interesting, huh? I would not at all for a minute have thought that was going to be the case when I saw the dome tweeter on this speaker. Wouldn't have thought that at all. Wouldn't have thought that. Cone mid-range, same thing. Wouldn't have thought that. But the data shows you exactly what is there, and it matches up with what I heard, because in my listening impressions, which were done, by the way, first, before I even put this thing on the stand to get measured, I thought to myself, man, it's not as wide as I thought it would be based on what other people had told me they heard. Now, what do I think that they were hearing? Who knows, but let's take a guess. See this extra energy back here? It's not high in level, but it's enough energy thrown back in the mid-range that I'm thinking maybe that's what they heard with more sound stage depth. Maybe it sounded deeper because you were getting some bounce off the rear wall. Maybe the bounce front wall. Maybe the bounce off the front wall was scattering out into the room. And I think that could have had an impact on the diffuseness of what I was hearing as well, because the imaging of the speaker wasn't really pinpoint. I think I saw where somebody said it was. I would personally disagree. It wasn't terribly diffuse, but it was more diffuse than most cone dome type speakers that I'm used to hearing. I'll just leave it at that. And I think again that has to do with you've got some extra energy being sprayed toward the back. Now, depending on how you aim the speaker. So I tried aiming them directly at me on axis, and then I had them mounted flat and firing directly out into the room. Doing them on axis sounded better. Firing directly out into the room, treble rolled off a little bit too much. If I turn the treble up, same thing as I mentioned earlier, too much variability with the music tracks, and I just personally did not care for that. Now we're going to look at vertical response, and this is where I said, do not sit above the tweeter axis. You would think that's common knowledge, but you never know. It's information that people can use. There's a big hole right through the mid-range. So as you stand up and you move around the speaker, when you stand up, you're going to lose a whole lot of vocal range, ton of it. Pretty much all the vocals are gone when you stand up above the tweeter. Very, very interesting. Even though the tweeter is tilted and the mid-range with the tweeter is slightly tilted, the mid-range is mostly tilted. Now, it doesn't matter if I sit directly on axis with the mid-range or the tweeter. Sitting on axis with the tweeter helps the high frequency. Sitting on axis with the mid-range actually creates more of a null between the tweeter and the mid-range. So while this may have been designed with the mid-range axis in mind, I think that information may not be up to date. We'll just leave it at that. In terms of output capability, let's go look at that. By today's standards, not great. We're looking at 86 dB, 1 meter. We're about 3% THD roughly, maybe 1 to 2, 2 to 3, somewhere in this region. So not very great. Then we turn it up to 96 dB, and well, let me back up. So I say not very great. By today's standards, a lot of speakers can do better than that. They stay below 1% THD at 86 and 96 dB output. It's not a problem for most speakers by today's standards. But 30-year-old design, 40-year-old design, and the wear that goes with this speaker, that's okay. That's okay. And personally, I'm not a stickler for distortion. That's not something I don't sit in reviews and say, man, I can hear all this distortion. I've done all this training and I know all this distortion. I can't. That's not me. That's other people, and that's fine. So let's talk about compression. Compression. As you turn the speaker up, what happens? Well, fellas, I'm here to tell you, the speaker actually performs pretty well until you get to about 50, 60 hertz. Man, this thing can take some power. It took some power from my amplifier. I got a 220, 240 watt per channel amplifier, Parasound. That's pretty good. Also tried a Crown, and I threw it on an AVR just to see. My old Denon AVR with power. Denon AVR did fine, you know. Threw a crossover on about 60 hertz. Man, it did fine. Not a problem at all. So I'm actually surprised at the output capability of this speaker. It's pretty interesting. And long-term compression, we're just going to go ahead and say that it's not really a problem. 86 dB, 96 dB. It's within half a dB at 96 dB. Guys, not a big deal. So let's see here. With that, that's pretty much the review of this speaker. Like I said, it's more for educational purposes only. This isn't something that you're just going to run out and buy today. Even if you wanted to, you'd probably be having trouble finding it. So it's just, it's an interesting informational video is what we're going to call it. So let's see. Well, I got any fellers over here. Oh, anybody got some comments before I bail up out of here? I appreciate y'all watching this long. No. All right. Well, I don't really see any questions being asked specifically about this speaker. I do see some funny comments though, and I just want to tell y'all I appreciate y'all out there. And kind of going back to what I said earlier, you know what, audiophile gang, if you see a review or if you see a feller say that they like a speaker or they didn't like a speaker, and you feel the opposite way, you know what? You know what you don't have to do? You don't have to berate them. You don't have to reply. In fact, you can just let it go. You can say, you know what? That person liked that speaker, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with you being you. You know? We're all in this together, just like that song, that High School Musical, which I ain't never seen before. I don't know no High School Musical. I've never seen that before, but it's that's a saying I think the youngins say. Get this light off of my face. Yep. We're all in this together, ladies and gentlemen, and we're just going to keep on this journey, and we're going to learn a little bit more each day. Try to learn about what these speakers are doing and what that means to us as a community. You like a certain sound, you know what to go shop for. But I won't go on that tangent. I do appreciate y'all watching, and if you're seeing this for the first time, you might want to go back and watch some of my other videos. And yeah, that's it. So I appreciate y'all watching once again, and I do hope y'all have a solid week. Peace and love, fellas. Peace and love.